Bread was garbage, stale, gritty, barely fit for animals. That's the story the modern food industry needs you to believe. Because if you find out that peasants in 1340 were eating bread with 3 ingredients that outperformed your grocery store loaf on shelf life, nutrition, and digestion, you might start asking why your whole grain artisan sourdough costs €9 and molds in 4 days. 2 years of digging through monastery records, manorial accounts, and reconstructed recipes from the British Museum, the Vatican Library, and excavated bakery sites in York and Lubeck turned up something they don't teach in culinary school. 15 medieval bread recipes. 3 ingredients each. Most of them lasted weeks or months without refrigeration. Some of them were used as medicine. One of them kept entire armies alive on campaigns that lasted years. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why these breads were buried, who buried them, and how to bake them yourself with ingredients you can buy today. If you're tired of being lied to about food, hit that like button now. It tells the algorithm to put this in front of people who still care about real knowledge. Time to start digging. Number 1. Salt. That's it. Bannock was the bread that fed Scottish Highlanders, Irish farmers, and English foot soldiers from roughly the 1100s through the 1700s. A single bannock cake, about the size of a dinner plate and 3 centimeters thick, weighed around 400 grams and provided over 1,200 calories of slow-burning energy. Here's what the modern oat industry doesn't want anyone to know. The Scottish Royal Society of Edinburgh published an analysis in 1894 of soldiers from the Highland regiments. Men who marched on bannock and water for weeks at a time showed bone density and grip strength that doctors couldn't replicate in urban populations eating modern bread. The oats were stone-milled, never heat-treated, which preserved the beta-glucan content. Beta-glucan is the soluble fiber that lowers LDL cholesterol and stabilizes blood sugar. Modern rolled oats lose up to 60% of it in the steaming process. Bannock bakes on a hot stone or a cast iron griddle. 12 minutes aside. No oven, no yeast, no rising time. A peasant could go from raw oats to fed family in under 30 minutes. Compare that to a supermarket loaf with 23 ingredients, half of them unpronounceable, and the picture starts to clarify why this knowledge was inconvenient. Mixed grain survival loaf. Wheat, rye, water. That's the entire recipe. This one belongs on the list because it's the foundation, and any honest accounting of medieval breads has to acknowledge it. Massillon bread combined wheat and rye in ratios that shifted by region and harvest, but most often sat at 60% rye, 40% wheat. The University of Helsinki ran a 2018 analysis on reconstructed Massillon recipes and found the mixed grain loaves retained moisture 40% longer than pure wheat bread and resisted mold growth up to 3 times longer than modern whole wheat. The reason is chemistry. Rye contains pentosans, gelling fibers that lock in moisture. Rye also produces lactic and acetic acid during fermentation, both of which kill mold spores before they can colonize. Wheat brings the gluten that gives the loaf structure. Together they made a bread that a family of 6 could eat for 2 weeks from a single bake. Try that with a grocery store sourdough. Number 3. Pumpernickel, the black brick of Westphalia. Coarse rye, water, salt. The Westphalian pumpernickel of the 1400s was nothing like the soft brown sandwich bread sold under that name today. The original was baked in sealed steam ovens for 16 to 24 hours at low temperatures, around 100 degrees Celsius. The result was a near-black, dense brick that could last 6 months wrapped in linen. Westphalian peasants documented in monastery records from Soest in 1450 traded pumpernickel as currency, grams, and could feed a working man for a week. The long, slow bake caused a Maillard reaction that broke down phytic acid, the compound in grain that blocks mineral absorption. So while modern whole wheat bread actually steals iron and zinc from the body, pumpernickel released them. The German Bakers Guild in Münster banned commercial pumpernickel production in 1888 because they claimed nobody had time for a 16-hour bake anymore. What they meant was that industrial bakers couldn't profit from a bread that took a day to make and lasted half a year. Convenience killed it. The peasants who kept eating it lived longer. Number 4. Boxty, the Irish potato bread of necessity. Raw grated potato, cooked mashed potato, salt. Boxty emerged in Ireland in the 1500s after the potato arrived from the New World, and it became a staple by the 1600s. The recipe used no flour, no yeast, no eggs. Just potato in 2 states. The raw grated potato provided starch that bound the loaf together. The cooked potato gave it structure. Salt was the only seasoning. A single boxty cake provided 180 calories per 100 grams and contained vitamin C, which actual grain bread does not. During the lean months of February and March, when grain stores ran low, boxty kept Irish peasants alive. Records from the Royal Irish Academy show that boxty consumption peaked in counties Leitrim, Cavan, and Mayo, and these were the same counties that survived the early years of the Great Hunger longer than wheat-dependent regions. Modern nutritionists call potato a low-quality carb. That's an industry term invented in the 1990s to sell processed cereal. A 1996 study from the University of Sydney ranked boiled potato as the single most satiating food on the planet, beating bread, pasta, and rice. Irish peasants knew this in 1620. Number 5. Trencher bread, the plate you ate. Stale wheat dough, coarse flour, water. The trencher is too important to leave off this list, even briefly. Medieval feasts didn't waste plates because they didn't have plates. They had trenchers. Thick, dense, intentionally underrisen wheat loaves baked rock hard, sliced into squares, and used as the eating surface. The trencher absorbed gravy, juices, and sauces throughout the meal. By the end, 1340, show large households bake trenchers in batches of 300 and 400 at a time, storing them for up to 30 days. Reconstructed trenchers tested by archaeologists at the University of Leicester remained structurally intact and edible after 28 days at room temperature. Modern sandwich bread, with its dough conditioners and calcium propionate, moulds in 5. Number 6. Bara Brith, the Welsh tea bread. Stale bread soaked in tea, dried fruit, flour. Look closely at this one because it tells the whole story of how medieval people thought. They didn't throw out stale bread, they reincarnated it. Welsh Bara Brith, documented from the 1300s onward, took bread that was 3 or 4 days past its prime, soaked it in cooled black tea overnight, then folded it back into a fresh dough with whatever dried fruit was available, usually currants or chopped apple. The tea served 2 purposes. It rehydrated the stale bread and added tannins that extended the new loaf's shelf life by another 5 to 7 days. The Welsh National Library holds household records from Carmarthenshire in 1612 that document a single household reusing bread through 3 full bake cycles. 3 loaves became 4, 4 became 5. Nothing was wasted. For working men who remember when food meant something, this is the principle that's been stolen. The medieval mind didn't see waste because it didn't create waste. Every leftover became the foundation of the next meal. Number 7. Manchit, the white bread of the rich, hidden in plain sight. Fine sifted in England from the 1200s through the 1600s. It was small, round and white, baked from flour, sifted through silk to remove every trace of bran. Most people assume white bread is a modern industrial invention. It isn't. Manchit was being baked in royal kitchens 700 years ago, and that fact matters. The aristocracy ate manchit because it was prestigious, not because it was healthy. Records from the Westminster Palace kitchens in 1378 show that nobles who ate manchit exclusively suffered from constipation, scurvy, and what physicians at the time called the noble man's gout. Peasants eating coarse maslin and rye had none of these issues. The medieval physician Bartholomew Anglicus wrote in 1240 that the bread of the rich is the disease of the rich. Modern white bread is just industrial manchit. Every problem the medieval physicians documented in 1240 is now epidemic. We didn't invent these diseases, we democratized them. Number 8. Bear bannock, the Orkney barley loaf. Bear barley, buttermilk, salt. Bear is an ancient 6-row barley that's been grown continuously in the Orkney Islands since the Vikings introduced it around 850 AD. It's almost extinct now. Maybe 40 hectares are still cultivated worldwide. But for over 1,000 years, bear bannock was the daily bread of northern Scotland, the Hebrides and the Faroes. The genius of bear bannock is the buttermilk. Lactic acid in the buttermilk activates the natural enzymes in the barley, producing a leavened bread without yeast. The bake takes 12 minutes on a hot griddle. The University of the Highlands and Islands published nutritional analysis in 2019, showing bear barley contains roughly twice the beta-glucan of modern barley varieties, plus higher levels of selenium and chromium. Bear bannock fed Orkney fishermen who rowed open boats to Iceland in February. If it could keep them alive in those conditions, an office job will probably manage. Number 9. Galette de Sarrasin, the Breton buckwheat loaf. Buckwheat salted water, thyme. In Brittany, on the windswept coast of northwest France, the soil is too acidic for wheat. So Breton peasants from the 1100s onward turned to buckwheat, which isn't actually wheat at all. It's a pseudo-cereal related to rhubarb. Galette de Sarrasin was the daily bread of Breton farmers for 800 years. 3 ingredients. No yeast, no fat, no sugar. Buckwheat is the only common grain that contains all 8 essential amino acids in complete proteins. It's also gluten-free, high in rutin, which strengthens blood vessels, and it grows in soil that won't support anything else. The Bretons figured out what every modern nutritionist now charges €200 a session to explain. The poorest soil produced the most nutritious bread. The galette is mixed with salted water, allowed to rest for 12 hours, then poured thin onto a hot iron and cooked in under a minute. A single galette provides over 300 calories of complete protein. Compare that to a slice of Wonder Bread. Number 10. Rugbrød, the Danish daily loaf. Cracked rye, water, salt. Danish rugbrød has been baked continuously since at least the 900s, and the recipe has barely changed. Cracked rye, water, salt. That's it. 3 ingredients. The bake takes 4 hours at a low temperature. The loaf is dense, dark, and lasts 3 weeks wrapped in linen. In 1973, the Danish government commissioned a national nutrition study to figure out why rural Danes had lower rates of colorectal cancer than urban Danes. The answer was rug bread. The high fiber content fed gut bacteria that produced butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid that protects the colon lining. Urban Danes who'd switched to white bread had lost this protection within a single generation. Danish soldiers in the Schleswig Wars of the 1860s carried rug bread in their packs. After 3 weeks of campaigning in cold, wet conditions, the bread was still edible. Try that with a sandwich. Number 11. Lavash, the eternal flatbread of Armenia. Wheat flour, water, salt. Lavash is one of the oldest known leavened breads in continuous production, with documented references in Armenian texts from the 800s. UNESCO recognized lavash as part of intangible cultural heritage in 2014. The recipe is 3 ingredients, but the technique is everything. The dough is rolled paper thin, slapped against the inside wall of a toner, a clay oven heated to 400 degrees Celsius, and cooked in under a minute. Properly dried lavash lasts 6 months without refrigeration. Armenian families bake hundreds of sheets at once, stack them, and store them in linen. When they need bread, they spritz a sheet with water, and within 10 seconds it's pliable again. Armenian shepherds in the Caucasus carried lavash on transhumance routes that lasted 4 months. They didn't carry preservatives, they didn't carry refrigeration, they carried bread that simply refused to spoil because it had no moisture for mold to grow in. Number 12. Brennsuppe bread, the Bavarian survival loaf. Burnt flour, water, lard. This one is brutal, and that's exactly why it worked. In the Bavarian Alps from the 1200s through the 1800s, peasants who'd run out of fresh grain by late winter would deliberately burn old flour in a dry pan until it was nearly black, then mix it with water and a small amount of lard to make a dense, almost charcoal-like bread. The burning process did something the peasants didn't fully understand, but exploited brilliantly. It carbonized the flour, killing any mold or weevils, and created activated carbon that absorbed toxins in the digestive tract. Brennsuppe bread was eaten by people who had no other option. And those people survived famine winters that killed neighboring villages eating fresh but contaminated grain. A 2008 paper from Munich's Technical University analyzed Brennsuppe samples preserved in alpine farmhouses and found measurable detoxifying properties. The peasants in 1640 had no idea about activated carbon, but they knew burnt bread kept them alive. Pharmacies now charge €30 for charcoal supplements. They got the same compound from a pan and patience. Number 13. Roggenbrot, a Hanseatic trader's loaf. Whole rye berries, sourdough culture, salt. Roggenbrot was the bread of the Hanseatic League, the medieval trading network that controlled commerce across the Baltic from the 1200s through the 1500s. Hamburg, Lübeck, Bremen, Danzig. Every Hanseatic city had a Roggenbrot baker, and every trader carried it on voyages that lasted 3 to 6 months. The whole rye berries are soaked for 24 hours, ground coarse, mixed with sourdough culture, and baked at low temperature for 5 hours. The finished loaf weighs over 1 kilogram and lasts 2 months. Hanseatic ship manifests from Lübeck in 1432 list Roggenbrot as standard ration for crews of 20 men on 6-week voyages to Reval. The bread arrived intact. The men arrived alive. Modern German bakery Vollkornbrot is the descendant of Roggenbrot, but it's been industrialized. Real Roggenbrot still exists in maybe a dozen bakeries across Germany. If you can find it, buy it. That's 800 years of trading empire on a plate. Number 14. Communion bread, the bread of the soul. Wheat flour, water, salt. The unleavened bread used in medieval Eucharist from roughly 800 AD onward. 3 ingredients, baked into thin wafers, prepared with such care that monasteries had dedicated bakers whose only job was producing communion bread for the entire diocese. Why does this matter for a survival list? Because communion bread had to be incorruptible. It had to last weeks or months without spoiling, because rural priests received batches that had to serve dispersed villages. The technique was simple. Minimal water in the dough, very thin sheets double baked at low temperature to drive out every trace of moisture. The result was a wafer that lasted 6 months in a wooden box without moulding. This is the same principle as ship's biscuit, applied to a religious context. The Catholic Church preserved this knowledge in monasteries when the rest of medieval food science was being lost. Anyone who wanted bread that wouldn't spoil asked a monk, not a baker. Number 15. Ploughman's bread, the farmer's daily ration. Stone ground barley, well water, sea salt. The most common bread in medieval England wasn't wheat, it wasn't rye, it was barley. Barley was cheaper, grew on poorer soil, and matured faster than either of the other two. Ploughman's bread, documented in English manorial records from the 1100s through the 1500s, was the daily ration for agricultural labourers. A working ploughman ate roughly 1.5 kilograms of barley bread per day. The bread was dense, slightly nutty, and provided around 4,500 calories. That's not a typo. Medieval farm labourers needed that many calories because they were doing physical work that would destroy a modern office worker in a week. The barley bread sustained them for 12-hour days, 6 days a week, for 50 years of working life. Barley contains beta-glucan, the same fibre that makes oats heart-healthy, but in higher concentrations. It also has a low glycemic index, which means it released energy slowly across the entire day. Modern bread spikes blood sugar in 20 minutes and crashes it 40 minutes later. Ploughman's barley bread kept a man swinging a scythe from dawn to dusk. Look at what these 15 breads have in common. 3 ingredients each, no additives, no preservatives, no industrial processing. They lasted weeks or months. They cured ailments. They fed armies, sailors, and ploughmen who outworked anyone alive today. The medieval peasant ate better bread than most people do now. The question isn't whether this knowledge was lost. It was buried by industrial millers in the 1850s who needed white flour to be profitable. It was buried by chemical companies in the 1920s who sold dough conditioners and preservatives to bakers who used to make bread for free. It was buried by supermarket chains in the 1960s who needed bread that looked identical on every shelf in every city. Every one of these 15 breads threatens that system because every one of them can be made at home for a fraction of the cost with better results. This channel keeps digging up what they buried. If that's the kind of knowledge worth keeping alive, hit subscribe.